Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. My name is Dr. Naheed Dosani, and I'm a palliative care physician who provides palliative care for people who experience structural vulnerabilities like homelessness, poverty, and systemic racism. I'm the founder of the world's first mobile palliative care program focused on meeting the needs of people experiencing homelessness, the PEACH program, Palliative Education and Care for the Homeless in Toronto, Ontario. Our team, comprising of a group of compassionate health workers, cares for between 110 to 120 people at any given time, whether they live on the street, under a bridge, or in a shelter, through trauma informed care, harm reduction, and a human rights approach, so that everyone has an opportunity to have equitable access to palliative care. I'm also the founder of Toronto's first hospice for people experiencing homelessness, serve as medical director for the Region of Peel's COVID-19 homeless response,
Mr.
and hold
Dosani,
faculty. Yeah,
can you just slow down? It's very hard for
sure.
the interpreters, please.
No problem. And hold faculty appointments in the Division of Palliative Care at both the University of Toronto and McMaster University. Given my understanding that Bill C-7 will likely pass in one form or another, today I'm here to convince you of three things. One, that palliative care is not equally accessed by all people across Canada. Two, that people who experience structural vulnerabilities like poverty, homelessness, and racism face even more barriers to accessing palliative care. And three, that there are circumstances where people choose to pursue MAiD because the social conditions around them create the conditions for them to do so. We must do better. Part one, palliative care is an approach that improves the quality of life of people and their caregivers facing life limiting illness. In 2016, the Canadian Society of Palliative Care Physicians released a report, How to Improve Palliative Care in Canada. The report highlighted major gaps in palliative care in Canada, but also made six significant recommendations to address this. In 2018, Health Canada released the framework on palliative care in Canada, but aside from this, few, if any, of these recommendations have been put into place in any meaningful way, and they need to be. Part two, what gets talked about even less are the even larger barriers that exist to palliative care access for those who experience marginalization. I've provided street based palliative care for over 7 years to communities who face these barriers. I've seen this with my own eyes. In 2014, I had the opportunity to join a research team out of the University of Victoria to answer the question, what are the barriers that people in the margins of society experience in accessing palliative care? The study, led by my mentor and colleague, Dr. Kelly Stajdahar, and the report that followed is called Too Little, Too Late, and it tells a damning story. Through 300 hours of observational research, our team followed 25 precariously housed people, their support persons, and service providers. What did we find? That people who live on the margins have difficulty accessing palliative care. Why? Because the need to survive trumps discussions about palliative care when you live on the street, because death is so common on the streets, because early identification of palliative care needs for people on the streets is challenging, because our systems operate in silos for housing, food, healthcare, and income, and crosstalk across those silos is rare, because there are often barriers for home care organizations to provide care in non-traditional home environments, and because there's so much death on the streets that it's created a world of grief and vicarious trauma. In summary, to make palliative care more equitably accessed, we must build up the systems that support people who experience marginalization. Part three, given that today's testimony is focused on Bill C-7 and MAiD, let's talk about MAiD. I work in the trenches, on the front lines of the homelessness crisis, the opioid overdose death crisis, and now the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. I work in a world where I can successfully arrange for MAiD in 2 weeks in an organized and efficient fashion, but also a world where it takes years to get the people I care for into housing, months to get people income supports, and weeks to get the mental health and harm reduction supports if we're lucky. While I appreciate that these processes are not mutually exclusive and do not necessarily come from the same pool of resources, I find this morally distressing. I want to be clear. I've seen people who've pursued MAiD because they experienced marginalization. Take Bob, not his real name, of course, a man in his 50s with multiple sclerosis and complex wounds who was referred to our palliative care service for pain management. Despite optimizing his pain and providing good wound care, he pursued MAiD. Why? Because his progressive disease and complications of it led to an alcohol use disorder, which led to him losing housing, which led to him losing his family, and ultimately being alone. On the other hand, I've also witnessed how treating the social determinants of health can make a difference such that it can change the course of whether or not someone pursues MAiD. Take Mary, not her real name, a woman in her 30s with untreated HIV. She was on the brink of AIDS. She did not want to take her HIV medications because she was on the streets, had a substance use disorder, and no healthcare team. She wanted to die through MAiD, but after addressing her emotional and physical pain, helping her with housing, income, and wraparound supports, she changed her mind. She didn't want to die via MAiD. She wanted to live because she had a better quality of life. In the discourse on MAiD, I did not see the stories of Bob and Mary reflected. I'm told that based on current research, stories like Bob and Mary's common. But how do we really know? Have we really conducted enough research to know about the experiences of those who live on the margins? Further to this, I worry that Bill C-7 will have a disproportionate impact on working class disabled people, people who experience homelessness, poverty, and marginalization, people who can't afford their basic needs like food and shelter and medications. That without investing in ending the structures that create these situations, MAiD may not be a fair choice for everyone. With 35,000 Canadians experiencing homelessness each night, I expect the same energy that's been put into passing MAiD into our world and country, that we'll put that same energy into housing, scaling up harm reduction, implementing basic income, and pharmacare. On one hand, if you're making it easier for people to get MAiD, you also have an obligation to ensure that people are not forced into vulnerable situations where they feel that they need to access MAiD to escape these vulnerable situations. Thank you very much for hearing me out today.